steel beam moves wrong. Not slow, not dramatic, just wrong. The angle, the speed, the sound metal makes when it stops being structure and becomes something else entirely. Below, a car, a woman inside, a door that won't open. One man sees it before anyone else does. He's already running. 3 pulls. The third one costs him something he'll feel it for weeks. But the door gives. And 9 seconds later, when the beam finishes what gravity started, the car folds like paper, and the woman is on the sidewalk, alive. He puts his jacket around her shoulders. She looks up at him. He nods once, and walks back to work. No name, no waiting, no looking back. Just a man who saw what needed doing, did it, and disappeared into the noise of a city that never stopped moving long enough to notice what it almost lost, what it still doesn't know it owes him.
The alarm didn't wake Dion Cole. He was already up. For 58 in the morning. The sky outside still the color of old iron. Atlanta not quite sleeping anymore, but not yet breathing either. That in-between hour, that belonged to no one except the people, who had somewhere to be, and no good reason to be there. That early except, that showing up early was the only thing that had never let him down. He made coffee in the dark, not because he couldn't find the light switch, because the overhead light was too much at 4:58. Too aggressive, like someone making a point. Black coffee, no sugar, same mug. Same 4 scoops. Same 3 minutes standing at the kitchen counter, while the city outside decided what kind of day it wanted to be. His apartment was small. Not cramped, small. There was a difference, and Dion knew it better than most. Cramped meant too much stuff. Small meant the stuff you kept mattered. 1 couch. 1 bookshelf he'd built, from pine boards 6 years ago, packed with architecture texts and paperback novels, with cracked spines. A drafting table in the corner of the living room. That technically made no sense in an apartment this size, but that he'd moved in first, before the furniture, because some decisions aren't really decisions. On the drafting table, a sketch pad. Open. Half a building on the left page, pencil lines still clean. He'd been working on it after midnight. A low-rise housing complex, 3 stories, green corridors between the blocks, playgrounds built into the structure instead of shoved into corners like afterthoughts. He looked at it while he drank his coffee. Then he put the mug in the sink, pulled on his work clothes, and left. The bus at 5:40 carried the people who built the city before the city woke up to use it. Construction workers, hospital staff, delivery drivers. Nobody talked. Nobody needed to. The morning had its own language, and it was mostly silence. Dion rode with his hard hat in his lap and his lunch bag on the seat beside him. 42 minutes to the Voss Tower site. He'd made this ride so many times his body did it without him. His mind went somewhere else. It went to the sketch pad. It always went to the sketch pad. He'd been drawing that housing complex for 3 years. Different versions. Same instinct. Starting always from the same question, not what does this look like from the street, but what does it feel like to live inside it? What does it feel like to come home to it at the end of a day like this one? Nobody paid him to think about that. Nobody at the Voss Tower site asked him what a building felt like from the inside. They asked him if the welds were clean, if the steel was true, if the load calculations made sense. And they were right to ask him, because his answers were always correct. But the sketch pad kept filling up. The Voss Tower site was 3 blocks from the bus stop. 42 stories when finished. Glass and steel. The kind of building that would reflect other buildings back at themselves. Full of offices for people who made decisions about things they never touched. Dion touched things. That was the job. His hands were on the steel every day. He knew by feel when a weld was off, when a beam wasn't sitting right, when something that looked correct on paper was quietly wrong in the real world. That was knowledge that lived in the hands, not in any textbook. He'd learned the textbook version anyway. 2 years of architecture school before his father's diagnosis made the math simple and brutal. He dropped out. He came home. He built things with his hands instead of on paper and told himself it was temporary. 12 years later, temporary had a different name. He got to the site at 6:38. Conrad Hayes was already there. Conrad was 54 years old and had the face of a man who had spent 3 decades outdoors and had the receipts for every single one of them. He ran the crew with a no-nonsense authority that Dion respected even when it annoyed him. Which was often. Cole. Conrad didn't look up from his clipboard. East anchor check before the crew gets here. Something fell off in yesterday's report on Tier 8. Dion set down his lunch bag. I'll go up now. He took the elevator to the 8th floor, while the site was still quiet. Early morning construction had its own quality, metal catching the first light. The city spread out below, still purple and gray. He walked the tier methodically, checking each connection point, reading the steel the way other people read text. He found it at 647. Junction point 7. The weld looked correct from 3 feet away. From 8 inches, it was wrong. Not catastrophically wrong, not yet. But the stress distribution was off in a way that wouldn't hold under full load. And full load was coming when the next tier went up in 4 days. He photographed it, documented the exact location, typed the report into the system right there on his phone, standing in front of the problem, making sure every detail was time-stamped and clear. Flagged as urgent. Sent to Conrad's queue. Then he started back toward the elevator. He didn't know, yet that Conrad would look at the notification at 8:03, think about the project meeting scheduled for 9 o'clock, and decide the report could wait until after. He didn't know, yet that after would never come. At 7:06, Dion was back on the ground floor running a secondary check on the foundation anchors. The site was waking up around him, crew arriving, equipment humming, the organized noise of 60 people who knew their jobs settling into the morning rhythm. He was thinking about Junction Point 7, about whether urgent was the right flag level, or whether he should have marked it critical. He was thinking about the difference between those two words, and whether anyone else on this site understood that the difference was real. He was not thinking about the car. The black company car had been sitting in the temporary staging area since 7:02. The driver had pulled in, gotten a call, stepped out to take it. Just for a minute. He'd be right back. The car sat in a zone that wasn't cleared for vehicles during active work hours. Dion noticed it, filed it as wrong, added it to the mental list of things he'd bring up with Conrad when Conrad was done being annoyed about the anchor report. At 7:14, he heard the sound. Metal, but wrong metal. Too fast, too much. The specific frequency of something structural giving way under stress it wasn't designed to handle. He looked up. The beam was already moving. His body did the math before his mind caught up. Angle of descent, speed, impact zone. The car was in the impact zone. He was already running before he decided to run. Later, he would not be able to explain it clearly. He would say, I saw where it was going. He would say, there wasn't time to think about it. Both of those things would be true, and neither would quite cover what actually happened, which was that his body made a calculation it had no business making, that fast, and came up with the only answer that mattered. He hit the car door at full speed. Locked. He grabbed the frame, where the window had already cracked from the impact vibration, got his fingers in, pulled. The door didn't move. He repositioned, got more leverage, pulled again, felt something in his left shoulder light up like a signal flare. Third pull. The door gave, with a sound like a gunshot. Inside, a woman, holding the steering wheel with both hands. Eyes open but not focused. There was a cut above her left ear, bleeding in that theatrical way head cuts always bled, dramatic, persistent, making things look worse than they were. Or sometimes exactly as bad as they were. Dion didn't have time to determine which. He got his arm across her back, got her out of the car, carried her weight against his chest to the sidewalk 15 feet away. 9 seconds before the beam finished its descent, and the rear half of the car folded like paper. He felt the air move from it. He set her down on the sidewalk and looked at her. Her eyes were trying to find something to hold on to. They found him. Can you feel your legs? Her lips moved. Not quite sound yet. I need you to tell me if you can feel your legs. Yes. Barely a word. More like the shape of one. He heard the first siren already. Someone had called before he even reached the car. The site had protocols. He took off his work jacket and put it around her shoulders. She was starting to shake, shock, expected, manageable. The jacket was warm from his body, and it was the only thing he had to give her. She looked at him, really looked. The kind of clarity that shock sometimes delivered, cutting through everything unnecessary, leaving only what was real. She started to say something. Why did you? The ambulance came around the corner. Dion stepped back. The paramedics moved in, with the efficient precision of people who trained for exactly this. Dion moved out of their way and then kept moving, walking back toward the site, back toward the east anchor check, because the anchor check needed to be finished before the crew got to Tier 4, and it was already 7:22. He picked up his tools. Malcolm Webb was staring at him from 20 feet away with his mouth open. Malcolm was 29 and had been on this site for 10 months and had not yet developed what Dion privately thought of as a face for the job, the particular ability to see something extraordinary and return immediately to the task at hand. The anchors, Dion said. Clock's running. He worked through the morning. His shoulder ached, with a deep, specific pain that told him he'd done something real to it. Not serious enough to stop. Serious enough to know it was there. At some point during the lunch hour, one of the younger crew members set a folded newspaper on the beam next to him. Didn't say anything. Just left it there. Dion looked at it. The woman from the car was on the front page. Not a photo from today, an official photo. Press event or annual report, the controlled kind, where everything about a person was exactly as they intended. She was wearing an emerald green dress that hit just above the knee and fit like it was made specifically for her body. Which, knowing what she ran, it probably was. Her hair was in a flawless silk press, not one strand out of place. Her chin was slightly lifted in the way people held their chins, when confidence was something they'd decided to project and had long since stopped having to perform. Naomi Carter, CEO, Carter Voss Enterprises. He looked at the photo for a long time. Carter Voss owned the Voss Tower. He'd been helping build it for 6 years. He'd just pulled the woman who owned it out of a car with his bare hands and then gone back to work. He folded the newspaper and left it on the beam. Naomi Carter had, in 42 years of living, never experienced the sensation of not knowing what had happened in the moments immediately after it stopped happening. She was a woman who processed information the way other people breathed, automatically, continuously, without having to think about it. Data came in. She categorized it. She acted on it. The loop was always closed. The gap between the sound of the beam and the sensation of cold sidewalk was not categorizable. For hours in the hospital. 6 stitches above her left ear. Mild concussion. Bruised ribs. Alive, which, and she noted this, with the slightly detached quality the concussion gave everything. She had technically always been, but had never noticed, with this particular specificity. Daniel Brooks arrived 38 minutes after she did, which was as fast as a person could move, from the Carter Voss executive floor to Atlanta General, while also collecting her laptop bag, her phone, and the expression of a man who had received catastrophic news about the person his entire professional life organized itself around. He stood at the door of the examination room like he wasn't sure he had permission. She was sitting on the examination table in a hospital gown because her dress, emerald green, the one from this morning, the one she'd chosen specifically for the 9:15 board presentation, had blood on the left shoulder. "I'm fine," she said. "What's the board status?" He blinked. "The board, tell them the Q3 margins are holding, and I'll have the full presentation rescheduled by end of week." Daniel processed this. She could see him doing it. The small recalibration of someone who had arrived expecting crisis management and was instead receiving operational instructions. Miss Carter, Naomi. He still wasn't quite sure about that one. They'd been working together for 3 years, and he still hesitated on her first name like it might be a test. "You were just in an accident. I was in a car when a beam fell. Distinction matters." She looked at her hands. There was concrete dust on her left palm. She didn't know how it got there. She didn't remember reaching for anything. She was thinking about the jacket. She hadn't told Daniel. Hadn't told the emergency room physician. Hadn't told the 3 board members who'd called her cell before she'd left the examination room. She hadn't told any of them about the jacket. It was a work jacket. Navy blue. Faded in the way things faded, when they were used every day and washed carefully instead of replaced. One pocket was torn at the seam and had been repaired, with thread that was close to the same color, but not quite. The repair was neat. The kind of neat that came from someone who fixed things because they valued them, not because they had to. It had smelled like concrete dust, and something underneath that, something clean. Human. He'd put it around her shoulders and stepped back. No name. No waiting. No calculation of what the moment might be worth. She had spent 20 years in business. She understood human behavior at a structural level, what people offered, what they expected in return, how they positioned themselves in every interaction to maximize their outcome. She had built a company on that understanding. She did not understand this. It was the not understanding that stayed with her through the rest of the hospital visit, through the car ride home, through the first hour in her penthouse apartment sitting by the floor-to-ceiling windows, with the city spread out below her, and 3 of the 6 Carter Voss buildings visible from where she sat. He had saved her life, and then he had simply gone back to work. She told Daniel she needed to know who had pulled her out of the car. She framed it as company policy. Carter Voss had formal protocols for recognizing extraordinary actions by site personnel. All true, all correct, and underneath the correct framing, something she didn't have a clean word for yet. The security camera footage was limited. Construction barriers had blocked most of the relevant angles. The site had no record of any crew member reporting the incident directly. What the site did have was a badge access system, and badge access was thorough in ways that people who used it every day stopped thinking about. 22 days later, Daniel put a file on her desk. He set it down, with the specific care of someone placing something they weren't entirely sure was safe. His name is Dion Cole, Daniel said. 38 years old. 6 years on the Voss Tower site. Structural crew lead. She opened the file. The employee photo was standard issue, fluorescent lighting, cheap backdrop, the hurried composition of a process that photographed hundreds of people a year and cared about none of them individually. He was looking directly at the camera, not performing for it, not avoiding it, just looking with the steadiness of someone who had decided at some point that there was no particular advantage to being anything other than exactly what they were. She looked at the photo longer than was necessary. There's a note in the HR file, Daniel said. His supervisor has been logging him as Coleman for 4 years. He's submitted corrections multiple times. Still listed as Coleman? Daniel nodded. Still listed as Coleman. She closed the file. Schedule a meeting. Frame it as a performance review. Special assignment consideration. She didn't sleep well that night, or the next 3 nights, which was new. Naomi Carter slept well because she was disciplined about it. Same time, no screens after 10, the penthouse dark and quiet and properly temperature controlled. Sleep was a resource. She managed her resources. Except now, past midnight, she kept ending up at the kitchen window looking at the city and thinking about a man who had left his jacket on her shoulders and walked away without leaving his name. The meeting was in a temporary side office on the 15th floor. Still smelled like fresh paint. The door was open, and she was standing when Dion Cole knocked on the doorframe anyway. She noted that. Filed it. Thank you for coming, she said. He stopped just inside the door, hard hat in his hand, lunch bag in the other. He hadn't eaten yet. She could see the container inside the bag. He was taller than she remembered, broader. His hands were the hands of someone who used them for real work every day, knuckles slightly scarred, one thumbnail still dark from something that had happened weeks ago. He looked at her steadily. No performance. No audition. Just looking. Miss Carter. Naomi. Please. A pause. He accepted this without comment. Is there a problem with my work? He said. Quite the opposite. She gestured to the chair across from the desk. Please sit down. He sat. Lunch bag on the floor beside him. She told him what she knew. The accident, the badge records, the 22 minutes. She said it plainly, the way she presented quarterly projections, facts in sequence, no unnecessary emphasis. You saved my life, she said, and then you went back to work. He looked at her steadily. You needed help. I helped. She waited. Nothing else came. That's all there is to it, she said. Something moved across his face. Not amusement exactly. Closer to patience, the kind that came from long practice. That's all there is to it. She slid the folder across the desk. He looked at it. Didn't touch it. Inside is a position in our facilities coordination division, she said. Senior level. The compensation represents a significant increase from your current. I appreciate the offer. He slid the folder back. She looked at the folder, looked at him, processed the gap between what she'd expected and what was happening. Perhaps I wasn't clear about the scope of the role. I understood what you were offering. His voice was level, not cold, just exact. I didn't help you because I was looking for something in return. That's not why I did it. She sat back slightly. Then why? He hadn't meant to answer that. She could see it, a brief flicker of something, the small recalibration of a person who had planned to keep things simple and was now reconsidering. Because you were in danger, he said. Because that's what people should do for each other. A pause. That's usually enough of a reason. The silence that followed was different from office silences. Those were silences of calculation, of people thinking about what to say next. This was a silence that just sat there and meant something. She tried again. If not a position, then perhaps a different form of recognition. Financial, he stood up. Not impatient. Just done. I think you mean well, he said. But taking something human and turning it into a transaction, it cheapens it. Don't you think? She opened her mouth. Closed it. He had not expected to say something. That surprised her. He hadn't been trying to. But she sat there looking at him, with an expression that was new, not the board meeting expression, not the controlled press photo expression. Something underneath those. I need to get back to work, he said. Tier 4 check before noon. He was at the door when she remembered. Wait, your jacket. She turned to the filing cabinet behind the desk and produced, of all things, his work jacket. The navy one. She'd had it cleaned, not dry cleaned, actually washed, because she'd somehow understood that dry cleaning would be wrong, and folded it carefully. He looked at it. A brief pause, like he was calculating something. I forgot about that, he said. He took it from her. Their hands met for a moment in the transfer. Just a second. The ordinary contact of an ordinary exchange. She went still for just that second. He noted it, filed it, walked out. Naomi sat alone in the temporary office for 4 minutes after the door closed. Then she opened her laptop and called Pamela. I need you to run a full background check, she said when Pamela answered. On the construction worker, Pamela said. Not a question. How did you? Because you've been unfocused for 3 weeks, and you just had a meeting with the site crew lead, and you're calling me at noon instead of eating lunch. Pamela's voice was dry and precise. The voice of a woman who had been watching Naomi Carter operate for 9 years and had cataloged every variation. I'll have it to you by this evening. She had it by 11 o'clock that night. Naomi was at the kitchen island when the email came in, working through a contract revision, half a glass of wine she hadn't touched in an hour, the penthouse quiet the way it was always quiet. She opened the email. Pamela's note at the top said, read page 4 first. She went to page 4. Dion Cole, Educational History, Architecture Program, Georgia Institute of Technology. Enrolled at 20. Withdrew second year. Reason on file, family medical hardship. His father. She read it twice to make sure she understood. He hadn't left school because he failed or because he didn't want to be there. He'd left because his father was sick and the math was simple and the living was complicated, and he had made a choice without hesitation. His father died 18 months after Dion withdrew. He never re-enrolled. 6 years on the Voss Tower site. Structural crew lead for the last 3. Performance reviews, consistently excellent. No disciplinary record. 1 ongoing note, appearing in every annual review from the same supervisor. Supervisor Conrad Hayes continues to log this employee under the name Coleman. Employee has submitted written corrections on 6 separate occasions. HR has been notified 4 times. Error remains uncorrected in primary system. She read that 3 times. Then she went to the attachment Pamela had flagged. It was a document she recognized, the internal reporting system, the same one that processed safety flags from site crew. The timestamp was from 6 weeks ago. The file number corresponded to the Voss Tower site. Date, October 14th. Time, 6:47 a.m. Submitted by Cole Dion. Structural crew lead, Voss Tower site. Flag level, urgent. Location, Tier 8, Junction Point 7. Description, weld inconsistency at primary anchor. Load distribution compromised. Recommend immediate review before Tier 9 installation. The accident had occurred at 7:14 a.m., 27 minutes after this report was submitted. She sat at the kitchen island and looked at the timestamp for a long time. The man who had saved her life had also tried to prevent the accident that made saving her life necessary. He had filed the report. He had done exactly what he was supposed to do. He had flagged it urgent. And then he had gone down to the ground floor to continue his work because that was his job, and he trusted the system to do its job in return. The system had not done its job. She clicked to the next page. Conrad Hayes, Site Supervisor, received the urgent flag notification at 8:03 a.m. Log shows the notification was opened at 8:03. Then nothing. No action notation. No forwarding. No response to Dion's report. The notation next to Conrad's inaction timestamp reads simply, pending project meeting scheduled 9 o'clock a.m. He'd looked at it, decided it could wait, moved on. She put the document down. Pamela's note at the bottom of the email said, "There's more on page 6. I think you need to see it tonight." Page 6 was a summary of a governance document. Internal. Carter Voss header. 6 months ago. Operational efficiency update. Streamlined reporting protocol for site safety flags. She read the new protocol. The old one had required urgent safety flags, from crew leads to auto-escalate to senior management, within 30 minutes, if not acted upon by the direct supervisor. The new protocol eliminated that auto-escalation. Flags now stayed in the supervisor's queue until end of day. The document was signed. She knew the signature. Derek Voss. She sat with that for a very long time. Then she called Pamela back. It was 11:43 at night. Pamela answered on the second ring. The background was quiet. She'd been awake. "I read page 6, Naomi said. "I figured. Derek changed the reporting protocol 6 months ago." She kept her voice even. The way she kept her voice even in board meetings, when numbers came in wrong, and she needed everyone else in the room to not panic before she had time to understand what she was looking at. If the old protocol had still been in place, Dion's report would have auto-escalated to senior management at 7:17. Conrad's inaction would have been flagged. Someone with authority would have seen it in time to clear the zone. Yes, Pamela said. The accident wasn't just a chain of small failures. It was a chain of small failures inside a protocol that Derek redesigned to make exactly this kind of failure more likely. Pamela was quiet for a moment. "I'm not saying he designed it to cause an accident. I am saying he redesigned a safety system in a way that reduced accountability for site supervisors. And I am saying that reduction had consequences." Naomi looked out at the city. 3 Carter Voss buildings visible from this window. The Voss Tower skeleton lit in the dark, still going up. Still being built by people whose names the system had wrong. "Cole," she said. "Not Coleman." "What?" "His name is Dion Cole. The system has him as Coleman. Has had him that way for 4 years. He's corrected it 6 times. Pamela was quiet. "And the person who corrected the protocol that would have saved you is the same person the system can't bother to spell correctly." "Yes." Another silence. The longer kind. "Naomi," Pamela said. "What are you going to do with this?" She looked at the building skeleton. She looked at the timestamp. 6:47 a.m. She looked at the name, spelled wrong in every official document the company had produced for 4 years. "First," she said, "I'm going to do something I should have done 22 days ago." "What's that?" She closed the laptop. "Tell him I know what he actually did." She showed up at 7:02 in the morning. Not to the executive elevator. Not to the site office on the 15th floor. To the actual site. Ground level. Where the work happened, before anyone in the Carter Voss headquarters had finished their first cup of coffee. Naomi Carter stood at the edge of the Voss Tower construction zone in a burgundy dress that fit like an argument, and heels that had no business being on a concrete surface at this hour. Her knotless braids were pulled back from her face. Her posture was the kind that didn't waver, the kind that took years to build and cost something to maintain. Every single person who saw her stopped moving for exactly 1 second. Then went back to work, because they were professionals and they had deadlines. But they noticed. They all noticed. She found Dion at the East Anchor station running his morning check. He didn't hear her approach over the site noise. She stopped 3 feet behind him and waited. Not impatiently. She was watching his hands. The way they moved, over the steel, deliberate, reading the metal the way you read text, the way you read something you actually cared about understanding. He turned and saw her. 1 beat. 2. "Miss Carter," he said. "Naomi." He accepted that again without comment. His eyes went briefly to her heels. The concrete. Back to her face. He didn't say anything about it. She held out the folded document. The printout of his report. Timestamp 6:47 a.m. Every detail exactly as he'd submitted it. "I know what you did," she said. "Before the accident. 27 minutes before." He looked at the document. Didn't take it right away. Read it where it was, in her hand. The way you confirmed something you already knew, without wanting to give the confirmation more weight than it deserved. Then he took it. "Conrad knew," he said. "Not yet." She held his gaze. "I wanted to talk to you first." He looked at the timestamp. Looked at it for a few seconds longer than necessary. Then he looked at her. And something shifted, not dramatically, not a transformation, just a small recalibration in the way he was seeing her, like a lens finding focus. Why? He said. Because you filed this report, and then you went downstairs and kept doing your job and trusted the system to do its part. She paused, and the system didn't. And you still showed up the next day, and every day after. He folded the document carefully, put it in his jacket pocket. What are you going to do with it? He said. She said, I'm going to find out exactly how the system failed. Starting at the top. He nodded. Once. The particular nod of someone filing information in a place where it would actually be used. She left. He went back to work. But something had changed in the air between them. Not named yet. Not examined. Just there, the way a change in weather was there, before anyone could say exactly what the sky was doing differently. It rained on a Thursday 3 weeks later. Not hard, the persistent Atlanta drizzle that couldn't decide whether to be a real storm. The kind of rain that got into everything without committing to anything. Naomi had come to the site to review the Tier 12 progress with Daniel. But Daniel had gotten pulled into a call with the insurance liaison, and the site coordinator was running 40 minutes behind. And Naomi was standing under the overhang of the materials storage building watching water drip off the edge of the corrugated roof, when Dion walked by, with 2 coffees, from the cart, that the vendor kept running through every kind of weather, because he was either very dedicated or very stubborn or both. He stopped, looked at her, looked at the rain, held out one of the coffees. She took it. He stood next to her under the overhang. Not close. The distance of 2 people who had not yet established what distance was appropriate. Which was a kind of distance that had its own quality, aware of itself. Neither of them said anything for a while. The rain made small percussion on the metal roof. She said, Can I ask you something? He said, You own the building. You can ask whatever you want. That's not actually how I think about it. He glanced at her. Brief. Assessing. She said, When you look at a building, I mean when you really look at it, what do you see? He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, most people see the outside first. The height. The glass. How it catches light. He looked at the tower framework above them, steel rising into gray sky. I see the inside first. The way a hallway feels at 7 in the morning when the light comes through at an angle. Whether the stairs are wide enough for 2 people walking side by side, without one of them having to turn sideways. Whether there's a place near the entrance where you could sit for a minute before you go in. She looked at him. He was still looking up at the structure. Why does that matter? She said. The sitting place. Because most buildings don't have one. He brought his eyes back down. And people need a minute sometimes. Before they're wherever they're going. A place that's neither here nor there. Just a pause. He paused himself, as if demonstrating. Buildings don't think about that. They think about occupancy and flow and square footage. They don't think about the pause. She held her coffee with both hands. The best buildings, she said slowly. They know who they belong to. He looked at her. A look she was starting to learn. The one that meant she'd said something he hadn't expected. Yeah, he said. Something like that. The rain kept coming down. Daniel appeared at the edge of the overhang, phone in hand, expression apologetic. Miss Carter, the insurance call is going to run another hour. Should I reschedule the Tier 12 review for tomorrow? She didn't look away from the rain. Yes, she said. Reschedule. Daniel retreated. She and Dion stood under the metal roof and drank bad cart coffee and didn't talk about anything. That mattered for another 12 minutes. And somehow that was the part she thought about later. Not the conversation. The 12 minutes of not needing to have one. The call from Pamela came on a Tuesday at 6:47 in the evening. Naomi was in her office finishing the Midtown corridor projections. She picked up on the first ring. We have a problem, Pamela said. Derek moved this morning. What kind of move? He filed a formal disclosure complaint with the board. Pamela's voice was careful. The particular careful of a lawyer handling something that required precision. He's framing it as a governance concern. Says you've been conducting an independent investigation into the October site incident outside of established company protocols. He also flagged what he's calling repeated personal contact with a site employee during an active liability review. She was quiet for a moment. He's calling it a conflict of interest. Yes. She leaned back in her chair. How much does the board know? Enough to convene a review committee. They're meeting Thursday. Pamela paused. Naomi. He has photographs. Of what? You and Dion Cole. On the site. Under the materials overhang. He's had someone watching. She processed that. The rain. The coffee. The 12 minutes of nothing. What does the board think they're looking at? He's positioned it as a CEO making personnel decisions that are compromised by a personal relationship with the employee in question. She set down her pen. I haven't made any personnel decisions about Dion Cole, she said. I haven't changed his assignment, his pay grade, his crew position, or his reporting structure. I've spoken to him twice on site. I know that, Pamela said. The board doesn't know what they know yet. That's what Thursday is for. And the investigation? Suspended pending the review. He got exactly what he wanted from this move. You can't touch the reporting protocol question until the committee clears you. She stood up. Walked to the window. Atlanta evening. The Voss Tower lit against the darkening sky. 2 more floors added since October. He knew, she said, about you looking into the protocol change. Yes. Pamela let that sit for a moment. He knew before you did what you were going to find when you looked. She thought about Derek's signature on the protocol update. 6 months ago. The neat, precise signature of a man who was very careful about what he put his name on. He didn't change the reporting protocol to cause an accident, she said. He changed it because it reduced accountability for site supervisors, and he's had problems with site supervisors flagging things that were inconvenient for timelines. The accident was a consequence he didn't model, and now he's trying to get ahead of anyone finding out he built the conditions that made it possible. Probably, Pamela said. So he's going to use Dion to do it. That's the play. You can't defend Dion without appearing to confirm the conflict of interest. And you can't distance yourself from Dion without abandoning the investigation. That tells the truth about what happened. It was a clean trap. She recognized it because she had watched Derek Voss build clean traps for 12 years, and she had always been on the other side of them before. Thursday, she said. Thursday, Pamela confirmed. She hung up and stood at the window for a long time. Below, somewhere, a man with a sketch pad was going home on a bus. Dion found out on a Wednesday. Not from Naomi. From Conrad. Conrad Hayes had the look of a man who hadn't slept in several days and had made a decision about that fact approximately 30 seconds before coming to find Dion, and was not entirely sure the decision was right. He came to the East Anchor station at end of shift, waited until the rest of the crew was gone. I need to talk to you, he said. Dion set down his equipment. Conrad told him about the board review. About Derek's complaint. About Naomi being suspended from her own investigation. He told it straight. No spin. Just the sequence of events, as he understood them. Then he said, I heard about the review because Derek's office called the site manager to inform him that the October incident documentation might come up in the committee review. Conrad looked at his hands. My name is in that documentation. Dion waited. I didn't read your report, Conrad said. The morning of October 14th. I got the notification. I looked at it. I thought it could wait until after the 9 o'clock meeting. He stopped. I was wrong. The admission sat between them. Dion said, I know you know. Conrad looked up. That's why I'm here. He paused. Derek's people have been in touch with me. Indirectly, making it clear that if the committee review goes sideways, there will be an internal inquiry. And my name is on the log. What did they offer? Conrad's jaw moved. Nothing explicit. Just clarity about how the narrative could go. That it was a procedural failure, a gap in the new protocol, that the individual supervisor behavior wasn't the relevant factor. Meaning your mistake disappears into the protocol change. Meaning my mistake disappears into the protocol change, Conrad repeated. His voice had no inflection. Flat as concrete. And you want me to do what? Dion said. Not make it harder. Dion looked at him for a long moment. Conrad was 54 years old, and he had the face of a man who had done real work his whole life, and who was standing in front of someone whose name he had spelled wrong for 4 years asking for help. I'm not going to help you hide it, Dion said. Conrad nodded slowly. But I'm also not going to make it harder for you to do the right thing. Dion picked up his equipment. If you decide to tell the truth, you don't have to do it alone. Conrad said nothing. Dion left. He didn't tell Naomi. She had enough. And he needed to think about what was coming from the direction he hadn't expected, which arrived on a Thursday morning before he got to the site. Derek Voss was in his car. Not at the site. Down the block. Clean dark car, engine running, driver at the wheel. The window came down as Dion approached, and there was Derek, 58 years old, the kind of well-maintained, that came from very specific habits and very specific resources, the kind of comfortable, that had never needed to calculate bus fare. "Mr. Cole," he said, "a minute of your time." Dion stopped, looked at him, kept his hands loose at his sides. "I'm going to be late for my shift," he said. "I'll be brief." Derek had the voice of someone who had taken a speech class in his 30s and never forgotten it. Even, warm, professionally sincere. "I want to make sure you understand your position before the board review complicates things unnecessarily. My position, your employment position." Derek reached into his jacket, produced a folded document, set it on the window edge. "Your contract, specifically Section 14, confidentiality of internal company operations." Dion looked at the document, didn't touch it. "Any crew member who discloses internal documentation, reporting records, or operational information outside of established company channels is in violation of their employment agreement." Derek's voice stayed even. "That includes testimony to outside parties. It includes statements to any board-convened committee, if you're not formally called as a witness." He paused. "I want to be clear that I'm not making a threat. I'm making sure you have the full picture." "That's generous of you." Derek looked at him, trying to read the tone and not quite managing it. "You're a good worker," he said. 6 years. Clean record. It would be a shame if a situation that isn't really about you became something that affected your future here." Dion picked up his lunch bag from where he'd set it on the ground. He said, "How long have you known my name?" Derek blinked. "Pardon? My name? Dion Cole. How long have you known it?" Derek processed the non sequitur. Your file was part of the incident review, so, for years," Dion said. "The HR system has had me listed as Coleman for 4 years. I've corrected it 6 times. The site logs still say Coleman. The safety reports still say Coleman. The man who supervised me for 4 of those years still says Coleman." He looked at Derek. "You've been signing off on documentation with that name on it for 4 years. Did you ever notice?" Derek said nothing. Dion said, "I'm going to be late for my shift." He walked away. He didn't run. He didn't look back. He walked exactly the way he walked every morning, with the unhurried steadiness of someone who knew where they were going and didn't need anyone else to validate the direction. But that evening, sitting at his kitchen table, with the sketch pad open and the city doing its thing outside the window, he felt the weight of what was coming. The contract clause was real. He'd read Section 14 3 times before he ever signed it. He knew what it said, and he also knew what the report said. Timestamp 6:47. Flagged urgent. Sent and ignored. He sat with those 2 things, the clause and the report, the way you sat, with 2 things that couldn't both be entirely true about what the right move was. His father used to say, "When you don't know what to do, ask yourself what you'd want someone to do, if it were you." He thought about Naomi in the car. 9 seconds. He thought about Conrad standing at the anchor station looking at his hands. He thought about 6 years of building a tower, whose name he'd never have on any wall inside it, and the sketch pad full of buildings that would never get built unless something changed. He opened his laptop. Searched, Monroe and Associates Atlanta. Affordable housing architecture. Elliot Monroe, 58 years old. Founded the firm 15 years ago, after a decade at a large commercial developer, where he had, the profile said this simply, without drama, grown tired of building things for people who would never need to think about where they lived. The firm's portfolio loaded slowly. Dion looked at each project. A senior housing complex in southwest Atlanta. Community residences in the Old Fourth Ward. A mixed-use building in Vine City that had won a state award for sustainable design. He looked at how the buildings were photographed, not from the street, from the outside projecting power and height. From inside, lobbies that had light, hallways with windows, common spaces that looked like they had been designed by someone who had asked, "What does it actually feel like to be here?" He sat with that for a long time. Then he closed the laptop. He wasn't ready to call yet. Not because he was afraid, because he needed to finish one thing before he started another. He needed to see what Conrad was going to do. The board review happened on a Thursday. Naomi walked in at 8:55. She wore a midnight blue dress, fitted, precise, ending just above the knee. Her silk press was perfect. Her posture did not waver. She sat at the head of the table, looked around at 11 board members, and nodded once. The way she always started. Let's begin. Derek let the first 2 agenda items pass without incident. He was patient like that. She had always known this about him, that he was willing to wait longer than most people were comfortable waiting, because he'd learned that discomfort did most of his work for him. He introduced his concerns on the 3rd item, framed it as governance, operational transparency, due process in the context of an ongoing liability review. Then he set the photographs on the table. She looked at them. The site overhang, her and Dion, side by side, coffee cups, rain coming down at the edges of the frame. The image had the slightly over-sharpened quality of a long-lens shot. Someone had been 100 feet away, minimum. Derek said, "My concern is the pattern. A departure from formal protocol in the incident investigation. Repeated informal contact with a site employee during an active review period. Contract decisions on the Voss Tower project that appear to reflect," Naomi said his name. Not loudly, not with edge, just placed exactly where it needed to be, doing the work of an entire sentence. He stopped. She said, "You had someone follow me. I retained a security consultant for site. You had someone follow me." Same tone, same placement. The room was very quiet. She looked around the table. 11 people. Some uncomfortable, some carefully neutral, all of them watching. "Is there anyone here," she said, "who would like to argue that a CEO standing under an overhang during a rainstorm constitutes a governance concern?" No one spoke. She turned back to Derek. "I suspended day-to-day involvement," she said, "because that is the structurally correct decision for a company at our current growth stage. And the Q4 numbers have confirmed it. The company is doing well, Derek. It's doing well because I made the right call about where to focus my attention." Derek's jaw was very still. She said, "The investigation I initiated into the October incident was appropriate, lawful, and necessary. And I am going to resume it. Because the October incident was not random. It was the foreseeable result of a protocol change that removed a critical accountability mechanism from our site safety system." She set her own document on the table. The protocol update. 6 months ago. Derek's signature at the bottom. "This document," she said, "changed the auto-escalation requirement for urgent safety flags. Under the previous protocol, the report filed at 6:47 a.m. on October 14th would have reached senior management before 7:20. The incident occurred at 7:14. She paused. "I'm not saying the change was made to cause an accident. I'm saying it created conditions that made a preventable accident significantly more likely. And I am saying that it was signed by the co-founder of this company, who is now attempting to shut down the investigation into its consequences." The room was very still. Derek said, "The investigation protocols require," Pamela said, "the investigation protocols require that the subject of the investigation not sit on the review committee examining it." She said it from the far end of the table, where she'd been sitting, so quietly that half the board had probably forgotten she was there. She had a talent for that, being invisible right up until the moment it was most useful not to be. She set her own document on the table. "I'd also note," she said, "that the confidentiality clause Mr. Voss has apparently been citing to site employees does not apply to safety incident documentation under Georgia Labor Code. That application is legally incorrect. And I'd be happy to explore the implications of threatening an employee with contract termination for cooperation in a safety investigation." She looked at Derek. "If we're opening that door." The silence that followed had a texture. Then the door opened. Conrad Hayes walked in. He was still in his work clothes. Thursday's shift ended at 4. It was 4:23. He had come directly. He stood at the entrance to the boardroom and looked at Naomi and said, "I need to say something." She looked at him, nodded once. He sat in the empty chair at the near end. Looked at the table, took a breath. "I received a safety flag on October 14th at 8:03 in the morning," he said. "From Dion Cole. Structural concern at Tier 8, Junction Point 7. I saw the notification. I decided it could wait until after my 9 o'clock project meeting." He paused. "It couldn't wait." The room was very still. "Nobody put pressure on me to ignore it," he said. "Nobody told me to leave it alone. I made a bad call on my own, and I've been thinking about it every day since." He looked up. "I'm not here because someone told me to come. I'm here because a crew member told me that hiding a mistake and owning it aren't the same thing." He nodded at no one in particular. They're not. Derek looked at Conrad, then at Naomi, then at the photograph still on the table. I withdraw the governance concern, he said. It came out smaller than anything he'd said in the meeting. Smaller than it had probably ever sounded in his head when he'd rehearsed this outcome. Noted, Naomi said. She moved to the next agenda item. She did not look at Derek again for the rest of the meeting. Not because she was avoiding it. Because he wasn't worth the attention anymore. He had been taking up space at the edge of her professional life for 8 years. The residue of a business partnership that had curdled slowly and a board seat that she'd never found the right mechanism to remove. And sitting in that room watching him deploy surveillance photographs and contract clauses and the careful machinery of a man protecting himself at the expense of the truth, it had produced in her exactly one feeling. Not anger, not satisfaction, relief. The specific relief of finally being able to see something clearly that you'd been squinting at for a long time. After the meeting, she went to her office and called Dion. He answered on the second ring. She could hear the ambient sound of the site in the background. Metal, wind, the acoustic signature of a place where things were being built. Are you somewhere you can talk? A pause. The background noise diminished. He'd moved somewhere quieter. Yeah, he said. What's wrong? Nothing. She thought about how to explain it. She decided not to. I had a board meeting this morning. Derek brought the photographs. Of the site. Of us. A pause. I wanted you to know, she said, in case it came to you another way. I didn't want you to find out from someone else. Silence on his end. Not the processing kind. Something different. Are you okay? He said. She stopped. Not what happened. Not what does this mean. Not what are the consequences for me. Are you okay? She stood at her office window and looked at the city. The vast tower, nearly finished now, glass going up on the upper floors, starting to reflect the buildings around it. She felt something give way in her chest. Not a collapse. Not even close to a collapse. More like a load-bearing element that had been holding too much for too long and had finally, carefully, shifted its weight. Yes, she said. I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. Good, he said. She watched a hawk make slow circles over the midtown buildings. The board, she said. They heard Conrad. How did he do? She thought about Conrad walking in at 4:23, still in his work clothes. He told the truth, she said, in front of everyone who needed to hear it. Dion was quiet for a moment. Then, he made that choice himself. I know. Another pause. Different from the others. Fuller. She said his last name the way he sometimes said hers, not formal. Precise. Cole. Yeah, I want to ask you something. And I want you to answer honestly. Not kindly. Okay. Are you drawing buildings again? A silence. 3 seconds. 4. Yes, he said. Quiet. Like the word had needed to travel somewhere to get out. Good, she said. Just that. Good. She didn't offer anything else. Didn't suggest. Didn't name what she'd seen on his kitchen table the week before. There's a firm, he said after a moment. Monroe and Associates. They do affordable housing. I've been looking at their work. She knew them. She'd seen Elliot Monroe's projects in development trade publications. She'd looked at the photographs and thought, someone designed these from the inside out. I know their work, she said. I was thinking about reaching out. She held absolutely still. The very specific stillness of someone trying not to do the one thing they most wanted to do, which was solve for a problem that wasn't hers to solve. You should, she said. Only that. Nothing more. He seemed to hear what she hadn't said. Thank you, he said, for not saying anything else. I almost did. I know. And there was something in his voice, something warm and aware, like he could see the restraint it had taken. That's the part that matters. She looked out the window for another moment. Then she said, there's something I need to finish going through in the company records. From before your time at the site. What kind of records? The old bid database. Proposals submitted before the Voss Tower broke ground. She paused. I want to make sure I have the complete picture of how the project started. That sounds like it could take a while. It might, she said, but I think it's important to know the whole story, not just the part that was visible. He said nothing for a moment. Then, let me know what you find. She said she would. She hung up and turned back to her desk. The bid database was 7 years deep and not organized in any way that suggested anyone had expected anyone to look at it carefully. She started pulling files. Old proposals. Rejected submissions. The documentation of decisions made in a conference room 9 years ago by people who were thinking about return on investment and market positioning, and not about the fact that every number on every page corresponded to a real place, where real people would eventually live, or work, or come home to. She pulled a file dated 9 years back. Pre-construction proposal for the Voss Tower site. Multiple submissions reviewed. She started reading. Third submission in the stack. She almost missed it. The formatting was different from the others, not a firm letterhead, a single-page cover with hand-typed contact information. She almost turned to the next one. She didn't. She read the project description. Community residential complex. Mixed income. 3 stories, green corridors integrated into the structural plan rather than added as landscape. Common spaces designed to serve daily function, not lobby aesthetics, actual use. Ground-level retail allocated specifically for neighborhood-serving businesses. She read the design philosophy section. The best buildings know who they belong to. This proposal starts from that question and works outward. She read the contact information at the top. Dion Cole, independent architectural designer. She sat very still. He had been 29 years old. He had submitted this proposal for the site, where he would spend the next 6 years building someone else's building with his bare hands. He had proposed something real and good and grounded, and someone in a conference room had looked at the numbers and written in the margin, insufficient commercial ROI. Proceed with Harmon and Voss proposal. She pulled the decision log. The Harmon and Voss proposal, the one that became the Voss Tower, had been approved in the same meeting. Same date. Derek Voss had been in that meeting. She looked at the 2 documents side by side. The one that had been chosen, the one that had not. She sat with that for a long time. Outside her window, the Voss Tower stood against the evening sky. Glass and steel, and 42 floors of something large, and expensive and correct in every measurable way. Built by a man whose name the system still spelled wrong. Built by a man whose better idea had been sitting in a reject file for 9 years, while he laid the steel for someone else's version. She picked up her phone. She didn't call him. Not yet. Not tonight. She needed to think about how to do this right. She had a history of arriving with things in her hands. Folders and offers and solutions and renovations. She had a history of walking into rooms with an answer before she'd understood what the question actually was. This was not going to be one of those times. She closed the bid file, opened the Monroe and Associates website on her screen. Read about their work for a while. Let herself see what he had been seeing when he read it. Then she turned off her desk lamp and sat in the dark with the city outside and thought about what it meant to know the whole story of something. And what you owed a person when the story turned out to be different from the one you'd been telling yourself. The rain started again. Soft this time. The real thing, finally committing. She let it come down. He called Monroe and Associates on a Friday morning. Not from his apartment. From the break room at the Voss Tower site during the 20 minutes between the end of the morning anchor check and the start of the Tier 15 install. The break room had one window that looked out over the foundation of the adjacent lot. Empty land. Chain link fence. A no trespassing sign, so faded it had become part of the scenery. He'd been looking at that lot for 6 years. He dialed. Got transferred twice. Left a voicemail he kept to 38 seconds, because anything longer would have given him time to talk himself out of it. He said his name. He said he had 6 years of structural experience, and 2 years of interrupted architecture school, and a sketch pad full of things he'd been waiting too long to build. He said he understood if that wasn't enough. He said he'd bring what he had, and they could decide. 38 seconds. He hung up before he could add anything. He went back to work. The callback came on Monday. He was on Tier 9. The site noise was too loud, and he pressed the phone hard against his ear and walked to the far edge of the floor, where the wind came, through the open steel, and carried everything else away. A woman's voice. Efficient. Warm underneath the efficiency. Mr. Cole, this is the intake coordinator at Monroe and Associates. Mr. Monroe would like to meet with you. Would Friday morning work? Friday, he said. Yes. 9 o'clock. Bring whatever you have. He brought the sketch pad. Just the sketch pad. He thought about making copies of individual pages, organizing something that looked more like a professional portfolio. He spent 40 minutes Wednesday evening trying to figure out how to present what he had in a way that resembled what it was supposed to resemble. Then he closed the laptop and went back to the sketch pad. It was what it was. Pages of pencil lines. buildings designed from the inside out. 3 years of returning to the same questions, from different angles, trying to get closer to the thing he'd been circling since he was 29 years old. He brought that. Elliot Monroe was 58 years old and met Dion in the lobby himself, which was not what Dion had expected. The intake coordinator had said she'd bring him up. But when Dion walked in at 8:57, there was a man with the hands of a draftsman and the eyes of someone who had never stopped being one, standing near the entrance like he'd been there a while. Monroe, he said, offered his hand. Cole, Dion said, took it. They walked the office before they sat down. Monroe narrated without performing. This project, those decisions, that constraint, they'd worked around 3 different ways before finding the one that was right. He pointed at photographs on the wall, not glossy exterior shots, the interior ones, lobbies with actual light, stairwells you'd want to use, common spaces that looked like someone had asked what people would actually do there before deciding where to put the chairs. He asked Dion what he saw in one of them. Dion looked at a photograph of a hallway in a senior housing complex on the east side. Said, the windows face east. So the light comes in the morning when people are starting their day, not the afternoon when they're trying to rest. Monroe looked at him. That decision isn't in any of our design documentation, he said. That's just what we chose. It shows, Dion said. They sat down. Monroe opened the sketch pad and said nothing for a while. He turned pages slowly. Stopped at the housing complex. Stopped at the community center. Stopped at the street-level retail concept for the Westbrook corridor, the one Dion had drawn, thinking about who actually lived there and what they actually needed versus what a developer decided they needed. Monroe put his finger on that one. This is the corner of Westbrook and Arden, he said. Yes, that lot has been empty for years. 6, Dion said. I've been watching it for 6. Monroe looked at him. What's been living in your head for that corner? Ground floor mixed use, Dion said. But not the standard version. Not a pharmacy and a dry cleaner for people who drive through. Something for the people who walk. A laundromat with real seating. A small grocery with a butcher counter. A barber shop. He paused. Things that make it worth being in the neighborhood, not just surviving in it. Monroe set the sketch pad down. Looked at the ceiling for a moment. Came back. You don't have the degree, he said. No. He said it plainly, not apologetically, just as a fact about himself that he'd long since stopped being ashamed of. Monroe nodded slowly. You have the credential gap, he said, and you have something else. He turned the sketch pad back toward Dion. You have the question right. Most programs spend 4 years teaching people to answer one specific question. How do you make a building that looks correct from the street? You're asking something different. How does it feel to be inside it? To come home to it? He paused. We can teach you everything that goes between the question and the answer. We cannot teach you to ask it right. Dion waited. The salary at entry level, Monroe said, is going to frustrate you. I won't pretend otherwise. It's significantly below what you're making now. I know what entry level looks like. What are you coming in for, then? Dion looked at the sketch pad. The housing complex he'd been drawing for 3 years, getting closer each time to what it was actually trying to be. I've been building things for 6 years, he said. Good things. Structurally sound. Done right. He paused. But they weren't mine. I want to build something that belongs to the people who live in it. And I want to do that from the beginning. Not arrive at the middle of someone else's idea and make it stand up. Monroe was quiet. Then he stood and offered his hand. Monday week, he said. 8 o'clock. Dion shook it and walked out of the office and down the stairs and into the Friday morning air, which was cold and indifferent and entirely unconcerned with the fact that something had just changed. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, held it, then walked to the bus stop. He submitted his resignation the following Wednesday, not Friday, not in the same breath as the Monroe offer, because that would have been panic dressed up as decisiveness. And Dion Cole did not make major decisions in the same afternoon he received good news. He sat with it for 4 days, made sure, then wrote the letter. Conrad received it without visible surprise. They stood at the East Anchor station, where Dion had filed the report that started all of this. Conrad held the resignation letter and read it twice, which wasn't necessary, since it was only 3 sentences, but he read it twice anyway. 2 weeks' notice, Dion said. You don't have to, Conrad said. Given everything. I know. Dion picked up his equipment. I'm going to. He worked it. Every day, every anchor check, every weld inspection, every tier review. He did the work exactly as he'd always done it, because the work mattered regardless of what came after. And the people who would still be here after he left deserved the same standard they'd always gotten from him. Conrad stopped calling him Coleman the day after he received the resignation letter. Not announced, not apologized for, just stopped. On his last day, end of shift, Conrad found him at the East Anchor station and handed him an envelope. From the crew, Conrad said. They passed it around. Dion opened it. A gift card to the architecture supply store on Peachtree, and a folded note with 23 signatures. Some of them names he knew well. Some of them names he realized he'd never quite learned. He stood there a moment longer than he meant to. Then he folded the note, put it in his jacket pocket, the navy one, repaired pocket and all, and shook Conrad's hand. Good work, Conrad said, and he meant it to cover a lot of ground. You too, Dion said, and meant it back, genuinely, because Conrad had ultimately done the harder thing, and Dion knew what the harder thing cost. He walked off the site at 4:51 and did not look back. Not because it didn't matter, because it did exactly as much as it should, and he'd already finished saying goodbye to it in the ways that counted. 3 days before Dion's last day on the site, on a Sunday evening, Pamela called Naomi. Not the other way around. Pamela called, which meant it was important. I found the silo in the bid database, Pamela said without preamble. The one from 9 years ago, the Voss Tower pre-construction proposals. Naomi had been going through those records for 2 weeks, pulling files, reading rejections, trying to understand the full architecture of a decision that had produced a man who built a tower he'd once tried to design. I know, Naomi said. I found it last week. Silence. Have you told him? Pamela said. No. Why not? Because I keep arriving with things in my hands. Naomi stood at the kitchen window. The penthouse dark, the city doing its thing below. I keep showing up with offers and folders and solutions. And every time I do that, I'm solving for my own discomfort, not for him. So what are you going to do with it? She had been thinking about this for 7 days. I'm going to wait until I can bring it to him as information, she said. Not as something I'm giving him. Not as something that makes us even. Just the truth about what happened. That's all. Pamela was quiet for a moment. You've changed, she said. Not unkindly. I'm trying to, Naomi said. She waited 3 more days. Let him finish his last week. Let him have that without her showing up in it. The board meeting was on a Thursday. Naomi walked in at 8:55 in a midnight blue dress fitted to the knee, silk pressed flawless, posture that did not waver. She sat at the head of the table. Looked at 11 faces. Nodded once. Let's begin. Derek let the first 2 agenda items pass without moving. He was patient like that. She had known this about him for 8 years, that he was willing to wait longer than anyone else in the room was comfortable waiting, because discomfort did most of his work for him. He introduced his concerns on the 3rd item, governance, transparency, due process in the context of an ongoing liability review. Then he set the photographs on the table. She looked at them, the side overhang. Her and Dion, side by side, coffee cups, rain coming down at the frame's edge, over-sharpened from a long lens. Someone had been 100 feet away at minimum, and had been doing it deliberately, and had been doing it for more than 1 day. Derek said, my concern is the pattern. A departure from established protocol in the incident investigation. Repeated informal contact with a site employee during an active review period. Contract decisions on the Voss Tower project that may reflect, Naomi said his name. Not loudly, not sharply, just placed exactly where it needed to go, doing the work of a full sentence by itself. He stopped. She said, you had someone follow me. I retained a security, you had someone follow me. Same tone, same weight. The room went still. She looked around the table. 11 people. Some shifting, some carefully composed. All of them watching her to see what kind of person she was going to be in this moment. She said, is there anyone here who would like to argue that a CEO standing under a construction site overhang during a rainstorm constitutes a governance concern? No one spoke. She turned back to Derek. I restructured my day-to-day involvement, she said, because that is the correct structural decision for a company at our stage of growth. The Q4 numbers have confirmed it. She set her own document on the table. This is the safety protocol update signed 6 months ago. Under the previous protocol, a crew lead's urgent safety flag auto-escalated to senior management within 30 minutes of submission. The update removed that requirement. She let that sit for exactly 3 seconds. The report flagging the structural failure at Tier 8 was submitted at 6:47 in the morning. The accident occurred at 7:14, 27 minutes. The room was doing math. I'm not saying the protocol was changed to cause an accident, she said. I'm saying it created conditions where a preventable accident became significantly more likely. And the person who signed that protocol update is currently attempting to use personal photographs to shut down the investigation into its consequences. Derek's jaw was very still. Pamela said, from the far corner, where she'd been sitting quietly enough that several board members had stopped accounting for her presence. I'd also note that the confidentiality clause apparently being cited to site employees does not apply to safety incident reporting under Georgia Labor Code. That application is legally incorrect. She set her own document on the table, and the surveillance of a company officer, without her knowledge or consent, raises questions about shareholder conduct I'd be delighted to explore if we're opening this door. The silence after that had a specific quality, the quality of a room recalibrating. Then the door opened. Conrad Hayes walked in at 4:23 in the afternoon, still in his work clothes. Thursday's shift just ended, and he stood at the entrance of the boardroom and looked at Naomi and said, "I need to make a statement." She looked at him, nodded once. He sat at the near end of the table, looked at his hands for a moment, then up. "I received a safety flag on the morning of October 14th, he said. From Dion Cole. Structural concern at Tier 8, Junction Point 7. Urgent flag. I saw the notification at 8:03. I decided it could wait until after my 9 o'clock project meeting." He didn't look away from the center of the table. "It couldn't wait. That was my decision, and nobody told me to make it, and I've been thinking about it every morning since." He paused. "I'm not here because someone sent me," he said. "I'm here because a man on my crew told me that hiding a mistake and owning it aren't the same thing." He looked up. He was right. The room was very quiet. Derek looked at Conrad, at the photographs still on the table, at the document with his signature on it, at Naomi, who was watching him, with an expression that was not triumphant and not angry and not performing equanimity. Just clear. Finally, completely clear. "I withdraw the governance concern," Derek said. It came out smaller than anything he'd said in the meeting, smaller than it had probably sounded in his head during any of the times he'd rehearsed this moment going differently. "Noted," Naomi said. She moved to the next agenda item and did not look at Derek again for the rest of the meeting. Not because she was avoiding it, because he had stopped being worth the attention. 8 years of him taking up space at the edge of her professional life, the residue of a partnership that had soured slowly, and a board seat she'd never found the right mechanism to address. And sitting in that room watching him deploy surveillance photographs and misapplied contract clauses, and the careful machinery of a man protecting himself at the expense of the truth had produced in her exactly one feeling. Not anger. Relief. The specific relief of seeing something clearly that you'd been half seeing for a long time. After the meeting, she went to her office and called Dion. He answered on the second ring. She could hear the end-of-day ambient sounds of the site in the background. Metal, wind, the particular acoustic of a place where things were being built by people who touched them. "Are you somewhere you can talk?" she said. The background noise diminished. He'd moved. "Yeah, what's wrong?" "Nothing." She stood at her window. The Voss Tower visible from here, glass going up on the upper floors now, starting to reflect the buildings around it. "I had a board meeting this morning. Derek brought the photographs. Of the site. Of us." A pause. "I wanted you to know," she said, "before you heard it another way." Silence on his end. "Are you okay?" he said. She stopped. Not what happened. Not what does this mean for the company. Not what are the implications. Are you okay? She stood at the window and felt something in her chest give way quietly. Not a collapse. More like something that had been braced for too long finally letting the weight redistribute. "Yes," she said. "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually." "Good." "Conrad came to the meeting," she said. "He walked in at the end." "How did he do?" "He told the truth. In front of everyone who needed to hear it." Dion was quiet for a moment. "He made that call himself," he said. "I know." Another silence. Fuller than the ones before it. "Cole," she said. His last name. Deliberate. Not formal, exact. Yeah, I want to ask you something. Answer honestly. Not kindly. Okay. Are you drawing again? A silence. 3 seconds. 4. Yes, he said. And the word came out the way some words came out. Like they'd been waiting somewhere close to the surface for longer than expected. Good, she said. Just that. She didn't offer anything else. Didn't suggest. Didn't name what she'd seen on his kitchen table the one time she'd been near it. There's a firm, he said after a moment. Monroe and Associates. Affordable housing. I've been looking at their work. I know their work, she said. She'd seen Elliot Monroe's projects in development trade publications. She'd looked at the photographs and thought, without fully registering the thought at the time, that someone had designed those buildings, from the question of what it felt like to live inside them. I'm going to reach out, he said. She held herself very still. The effort of not doing the one thing she most wanted to do, which was tell him exactly how to approach it, and who to call, and what to say. You should, she said. He seemed to hear what she hadn't said. Thank you, he said, for not saying anything else. I almost did. I know. And there was something warm in his voice, something that recognized the effort it had taken. That's the part that matters. She hung up and turned back to her desk. The bid database files were still open on her second screen. 9 years of pre-construction records for the Voss Tower site. She'd been through most of them. 3 more folders left. She opened the third one. The first day at Monroe and Associates, Dion took the bus in different clothes. Not his work clothes. Not the twice-a-year dress clothes either. Something in between, the pressed dark pants and the clean navy button-down he'd thought about more carefully than he wanted to admit, and had only landed on, after standing in front of his closet for 11 minutes the night before, holding 2 options, and asking himself which one was honest. The office was in Midtown. 12 people working when he walked in at 8:55. 2 buildings on the boards. A third in early design, affordable senior housing on the east side of the city. Monroe pointed at that one. That's yours to learn on. Study what we've done. Understand the constraints. Then tell me where you'd start. He gave Dion a desk by the window. Not the best desk. Not the worst. The desk of someone who had just arrived and had something to prove and understood that the proving happened through the work and not through anything else. The person at the next desk was 26, recently graduated, with the slightly wide-eyed energy of someone in their first real position who was doing an excellent job of appearing like they weren't. His name was Terrence. First day? Terrence said without looking up. First day, Dion said. Gets better around week 3. Dion opened the project file. Started reading. The technical language was familiar. He'd been teaching it to himself for 12 years, in borrowed library books, and late-night internet searches, and the margins of site documentation he wasn't supposed to annotate. The specific applications were new. He made notes. He asked Terrence 2 questions. Terrence answered both, without making him feel like he should have already known, which Dion noted, and filed as information about what kind of place this was. He ate lunch at his desk, worked through the afternoon, made observations on the East Side project, not corrections. Questions the design was asking itself that hadn't been answered yet. At 4:30 his phone showed a message from a number he didn't have saved. Good luck today. I hope the desk has a window. He looked at it, thought about who had that number and would send something like this. Then he understood. She'd asked Pamela to send it. Because she hadn't wanted to interrupt, but she'd also wanted him to know she was thinking about it. Both things true at the same time. He saved the number. Typed back. Windows good. Thanks. Put the phone down. Went back to the project file. 2 weeks into the job, Naomi found the last file in the bid database folder. It was a Tuesday evening. She'd been going through the pre-construction records and the gaps between meetings, pulling folders, reading the documentation of decisions made in a conference room 9 years ago by people who had been thinking about return on investment and market positioning and had not been thinking about the man who would eventually build their building with his own hands. The third folder, from the Voss Tower pre-construction period. She almost turned past the first document. The formatting was different from the standard submissions, not a firm letterhead. A single cover page, with contact information typed at the top. She almost moved to the next one. She didn't. She read the project description. Community residential complex. Mixed income. Green corridors integrated into the structural plan rather than appended as landscape. Common spaces designed for actual daily use. Ground-level retail allocated to neighborhood-serving businesses. She read the design philosophy section. The best buildings know who they belong to. This proposal starts from that question and works outward. She looked at the contact information. Dion Cole, independent architectural designer. She sat very still. He had been 29 years old. She pulled the decision log. The Voss Tower proposal, the one that became the building he would spend 6 years constructing, had been approved in the same meeting. Same day, she looked at the attendee list. Derek Voss had chaired that meeting. She sat with that for a long time. Outside her window, the Voss Tower stood against the Tuesday night sky. 42 floors. Glass and steel, and something that reflected other buildings back at themselves, while showing very little of what it actually was. Built by a man whose name the system still had wrong. Built by a man whose better version of the question had been sitting in a reject file, while he laid the steel for someone else's answer. She closed the folder, opened it again, closed it again. She wasn't going to call him. Not tonight. Not like this, with the information still hot in her hands, with the impulse to do something about it still stronger than the knowledge of what doing something about it correctly actually required. She had a history. She knew her history. She made herself wait 2 days. Let the information settle into something she could carry steadily instead of urgently. On Thursday evening, she drove to Monroe and Associates. Not to the Voss Tower, not to his apartment, to his office, because he had one now, and because going there meant going to him on his ground, in his new context, without the power differential of either of their previous meeting places. She arrived at 7:10. The office was empty except for Dion at his desk by the window, the East Side project spread in front of him, a half-eaten container of something, from the tie placed 2 blocks, over pushed to the corner. He looked up when she knocked on the open door. She was in a coat the color of dark plum, over a fitted black dress. Her knotless braids loose around her shoulders tonight. She looked like someone who had come from something important without stopping to change, which was exactly what she'd done. She had a folder in her hand. He saw the folder. His eyes went to it, and then back to her face. She saw him read the situation, that she was here, with something, and that something had weight. She sat down in the chair across from his desk, looked at him for a moment, didn't open the folder yet. She said, 9 years ago, before the Voss Tower broke ground, Carter Voss issued a request for proposals on that site. He waited. I've been going through the pre-construction bid records, she said, for 2 weeks, trying to understand the full history of what we built and how we decided to build it. She set the folder on his desk. I found something Tuesday night. He looked at the folder, didn't touch it. She opened it herself and turned it toward him. He looked at the top page. His own handwriting. 9 years old. He knew it immediately, the slight rightward lean, the way he'd formed his sevens, the handwriting of a 29-year-old version of himself, who had still been carrying something he hadn't yet fully put down. Community residential complex. Mixed income. Green corridors integrated into the structural plan. He read the design philosophy. The best buildings know who they belong to. He sat very still. Naomi did not speak. She let him read. Let him take the time it required. This was not a folder she was pushing across a desk toward an outcome. This was information she was sitting in alongside him. He read to the end of the document. Read the rejection notation. Insufficient commercial ROI. He sat back, and for a long moment he said nothing. He looked at the proposal, his handwriting, his question, his 29-year-old certainty that if he could make the question clear enough someone would see it. And something moved through him that was not simple enough to name. Not anger, not grief exactly. Something that contained both of those, and also something else, something closer to recognition. The recognition of a story you've been living inside, without knowing the full shape of it. He had submitted this proposal, and then he had spent 6 years building the thing that had been chosen instead, laying its steel, and checking its welds, and filing safety reports for it, and knowing it, from the inside in a way that nobody who had designed it, from the outside ever would. He had built it with his hands. 6 years. Naomi, he said. She waited. He looked up from the proposal. Why did you wait 2 days to bring this to me? He said. Because the first night, she said, I wanted to do something with it. Fix something. Make something right. She held his gaze. And I've learned that when I feel that way, I need to wait, until I know the difference between doing something for you and doing something about my own discomfort. He looked at her. She said, I'm not here to offer you anything. I'm not here to correct what happened or compensate for it or turn it into something that makes us even. She paused. I just needed you to know the complete story, because you're in it. You've been in it for 9 years, and you deserve to know what the full picture looked like. He was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, Atlanta was doing its November thing, cold and indifferent and alive. He said, Derek was in the meeting where they rejected this. Yes, he said, and then he spent the next 9 years signing off on documentation with my name spelled wrong. She didn't soften it. Yes. He looked at the proposal again, at his own handwriting, at the question he'd written at 29 that he was still asking in this office at 38, with a different desk and a different title and the same sketch pad. He said, you know what the strange part is? What? I'm not sure they were wrong. He said it slowly, like he was finding it, as he spoke. The ROI didn't pencil out. The site needed something that would recoup the investment on their timeline. He paused. They weren't wrong about the numbers. They just weren't asking the question I was asking. She looked at him. He said, what I'm angry about, and he stopped, because the word surprised him. He hadn't known, until he said it, that angry was the right word. But it was, what I'm angry about is, that nobody told me. Not a rejection letter. Not a call. The proposal just disappeared into a system, and I never knew it had existed in there. She said, I know. 6 years, he said. I was on that site for 6 years. And this was in your database the entire time. I know, she said again. And this time she didn't follow it with anything. No explanation. No context. Just the acknowledgement, clean and without defense. He looked at her. He said, that took something. To come here with this. Knowing what it would be like to watch me read it. She said, you've been coming toward hard things the whole time I've known you. It seemed like the least I could do was meet you there. He looked at the proposal one more time. Then he said, can I keep this? It's yours, she said. It always was. He closed the folder. Set it on the corner of his desk, where he could see it. Then he said, look at this. He turned the East Side project toward her. She leaned forward. Really looked, not skimming, not being polite. Actually following the lines. He said, I've got a footprint constraint that's making the common space too small to work. But if I push the stairwell to the north end and use it as a thermal buffer, I recover enough square footage to do something real with the ground floor. She studied it. Does the stairwell lose the east windows? She said. He blinked. If you push it north, she said. Does it lose the light? He looked at the drawing, picked up his pencil, started adjusting the landing orientation, angling the stairwell, so the east windows stayed in play even from the repositioned location. Fast. The kind of fast that meant the answer had already been there, and his hand was just getting to it. He stopped, looked at what he'd drawn. That works, he said. The light stays. The common space works. He sat back. She said, you were going to find that anyway. Maybe. He looked at the revised sketch. But probably not tonight. She looked at the drawing. At the east-facing stairwell. At the green corridors. At the ground floor, with enough room now to be what it was supposed to be. She said, the corner lot. He looked at her. The corner of Westbrook and Arden, she said. The one in this proposal. The one you've been watching for 6 years. He said, what about it? Carter Voss owns 3 parcels on that corridor, she said. Including the corner. We've been sitting on them for 2 years because luxury development numbers don't work for that location. She met his eyes. I'm not offering you anything. I'm telling you a fact. He understood the distinction. He understood it precisely because she had spent 3 months learning how to make it, and he had spent 3 months learning to hear it. If Monroe and Associates submitted a proposal for a community housing project on that site, he said carefully, it would go through the standard competitive review, she said. Same as any other submission. Evaluated on its merits by Marcus Reeves, who runs that division. She paused. Not by me. He looked at the corner lot he'd sketched. From memory, so many times the paper had slightly different where there than anywhere else on the page. He said, I'd have to convince Elliot it was worth pursuing. She said, that sounds like your problem to solve. He looked at her. She was looking back at him, with the expression she had when she was losing a battle she'd decided not to fight too hard. Not performing it. Actually losing. You're being deliberate, he said. I'm being transparent. She kept her face composed. I told you a fact. What you do with it is entirely up to you. He looked at the corner lot sketch. Thought about the footprint. The east-facing stairwell. The ground floor laundromat with real seating. The barber shop. The grocery with a butcher counter. The things that made a neighborhood worth being in. He said, I'm going to need a bigger sketch pad. She said, I might know where to get one. He looked at her. She looked at him. And there it was, that thing that didn't need naming yet. That thing that had been accumulating in the space between them since a morning in October when he'd put a jacket on her shoulders and walked away. That thing that had been building through every refused folder and every cup of cart coffee and every conversation that started about buildings and ended somewhere neither of them had planned. It was still becoming. That was fine. Some things were exactly right before they were finished. Outside, Atlanta was cold and lit and indifferent. Inside, the East Side project was spread across his desk with new pencil marks on it, and the corner lot sketch was there with all its wear. And the folder, with his 9-year-old handwriting, sat at the edge of the desk where he could see it. He said, Saturday. She said, what about Saturday? He said, I cook on Saturdays. If you want to learn, that's when. She said, what are we making? He said, pasta. From scratch. She said, how hard is it? He said, depends on whether you listen. She said, I've been practicing listening. He said, I know. She looked at him for a moment. Something in her face that was still settling into itself. The face of someone who had been performing composure for so long that finding the real version of it was its own kind of work. She said, Cole. Yeah, thank you for not giving up on the question. Which one? She said, the one you've been asking since you were 29. She looked at the sketch pad, the folder, the East Side project, with its new stairwell orientation. The one that keeps turning out to be right. He was quiet. Then, I couldn't stop asking it. She said, that's not a small thing. He said, it's just the only question I had. She said, that's exactly what I mean. She stood up, put on her coat. He walked her to the door of the office, and they stood in the threshold for a moment the way people stood in thresholds, when they weren't quite ready to end the night, but understood it was time. She said, Saturday. Should I bring anything? He said, wine. And low expectations about the first attempt. She said, the garlic. He said, everyone burns it the first time. She said, will you tell me, before it happens or after? He said, before. But only barely. She smiled. Real. The kind that started in her eyes, before it reached anywhere else. She walked down the corridor. He stood in the doorway and watched her go. Watched her push through the door at the end of the hall and disappear into the Thursday night. He stood there a moment longer. Then he went back to his desk, sat down, looked at the East Side project and the corner lot sketch and the folder with his name on it. He opened the sketch pad to a clean page and started drawing. Not the East Side project, not the corner lot. Something new, something that had been forming in the back of his mind since the conversation with Elliot Monroe, since the moment he'd walked into that office and seen photographs of buildings that had been designed from the inside out and recognized the question underneath them. He drew until the cleaning crew came, through at 9, packed up, rode the bus home. The city was quiet the way cities got quiet, after a certain hour, not empty, just lower. The bus carried the people who worked late and the people who started early and the people who had somewhere to be at hours that didn't fit any standard schedule. Dion rode with the sketch pad on his lap and his jacket over his arm. Saturday came cold and bright, the sky doing that November thing where it committed to being blue and the light off every surface had that flat silver quality that was honest rather than pretty. Naomi arrived at his apartment at 2 in the afternoon in dark jeans and a deep green wrap top and boots with a low heel, her silk press perfect, looking like someone who had dressed carefully to look like she hadn't, which Dion noted and found funnier than he let on. She had a bottle of wine, a wooden spoon she'd bought at the kitchen supply store on Peachtree, and a timer. He looked at the timer. She said, I read that most mistakes happen when people time instead of watch. He said, that's right. She said, so I got the timer for backup, not primary. He said, that's the correct approach. She said, I read several articles. He said, about pasta. She said, about cooking generally. Specifically the garlic problem. He said, there's an article about the garlic problem? She said, There are several. He set her up at the stove. Started with the oil and the temperature, not a formula, a relationship. You watched the garlic. You didn't time it, because heat didn't work on a schedule. She listened the way she'd learned to listen in the past 3 months. Full. Actually there. Not managing the interaction, just in it. She burned the garlic the first time. She said, I knew that was going to happen. He said, I didn't say anything. She said, your shoulders said something. He said, my shoulders were neutral. She said, no they weren't. He composed his shoulders. She started again. This time she watched instead of timing. This time the garlic turned gold and stayed there. She looked at it the way she'd started to look at things, not to assess, not to file, just to see. She said, this apartment smells like someone lives here. He said, someone does. She looked around, at the pine shelf packed with books, at the drafting table in the corner, at the wall, where the Westbrook corridor drawing was pinned at eye level, edges beginning to curl from 3 years in the same spot. She said, is that the one? He said, that's the one. She turned back to the stove, stirred the sauce with the wooden spoon she'd bought specifically for today. She said, it's going to take time. The Monroe proposal. The review process. He said, I know. She said, it might not get approved the first time. He said, I know that too. She said, does that change anything? He looked at the Westbrook drawing. No, he said, the question doesn't change. Just the timeline for the answer. She was quiet for a moment, watching the sauce. She said, I've been building things for 20 years. He didn't say anything, because this wasn't a conversation that needed participation yet. She was finding it, as she spoke, the way he sometimes found things in the sketch pad. Things he didn't know were there, until his hand found them. She said, and I realized recently that I've been building things that were large instead of things that were right. And I confused those two things for a very long time, because they often looked the same from the outside. He said, what changed? She said, I stood in the doorway of a room one night and listened to what it sounded like when something was actually right. She paused. It was smaller than I expected. And warmer. He looked at her at the stove. He said, the sauce needs 3 more minutes. She said, I know. I'm watching it. He set the table. 2 plates. 2 glasses. The sketch pad in the corner, where they could see it, but it wasn't in the way. The folder with his 9-year-old proposal beside it. He'd brought it home, from the office, wasn't sure yet, where it belonged, wasn't ready to put it away. They ate, and talked about the East Side project, about the stairwell question, about what it meant to design a common space that people would actually want to use versus one that photographed well. She asked questions that were real questions, and he answered them, and the answers led somewhere worth going. At some point she said, tell me about the ground floor retail. The barber shop. He said, what about it? She said, walk me through what you're thinking. Specifically. So he did. The placement relative to foot traffic. The way the awning line would create a covered transition between the interior and the sidewalk. The importance of windows that let people inside see out and people outside see in, because transparency in a neighborhood business wasn't just aesthetic, it was the thing that made a place feel like it belonged to the street. She listened. Then she said, what if the laundromat and the barber shop shared a wall with a pass-through window? He looked at her. She said, people wait in both. They're already in a waiting mode. If the spaces communicate, the wait becomes social instead of isolated. He stared at her. She said, is that? He was already reaching for the sketch pad. That's exactly right, he said. That changes the whole ground floor layout. She watched him draw. He worked fast, the way he worked, when the answer was already formed and just needed to get out. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer more ideas. Just watched the floor plan reconfigure around the shared wall, the pass-through window, the social logic of 2 waiting spaces becoming one connected experience. He stopped, looked at it. Yeah, he said, that's it. She looked at the drawing, then at him. He said, where did that come from? She said, I've been spending more time in neighborhoods lately, watching how people actually move through them. He said, since when? She said, since a man on a construction site told me that the best buildings know who they belong to. She picked up her wine glass. I've been trying to figure out what he meant by that. In practice. He looked at her. She looked back. He said, I think you're starting to figure it out. She said, I think I'm starting to ask the right question. He said, that's the whole thing. She said, Is it really that simple? He said, it's simple. It's not easy. She thought about that. Outside, Atlanta was doing what it did, cold and lit, and entirely unconcerned, with the two people in a small apartment, with pasta plates and a sketch pad between them, and a folder with a 9-year-old proposal sitting at the edge of the table like something that had finally arrived where it was supposed to be. She said, Cole. He said, yeah. She said, next Saturday. He said, what about it? She said, I want to try the garlic again. He said, on your own? She said, with you watching, but not saying anything until after. He looked at her. She said, I want to figure out when to pull it myself. He said, you'll burn it again. She said, probably. He said, and then you'll get it right. She said, that's generally how it works, isn't it? He said, yeah, that's generally how it works. She picked up her wine glass. He picked up his. They didn't make a thing of it. No toast, no ceremony. Just two people at a small table, with the sketch pad open between them, and the city outside, and the long, patient work of building something real still ahead of them. Which was exactly enough. Which was, in fact, everything.